Today's webinar is an opportunity to find out more about the awards for faculty at HBCU's program and to ask questions. The notice of funding opportunity is posted and applications can now be submitted. The deadline this year is April 12th, 2023, and notifications will be made in late December 2023. You can begin a project as soon as January 1st, 2024 or later. A quick introduction before we get started. I'm Mary Macklem. I'm a program officer in the NEH Division of Research Programs, and I'm the team lead for the 3 awards for faculty programs. We have a program at Hispanic serving institutions, historically Black colleges and universities, which we'll be talking about today, and the tribal colleges and universities program. I'm a musicologist by training, and I've been at NEH for just over 10 years, and I'm joined here by 3 of my colleagues at NEH. Jacob Lusk is the program analyst for the program. Al Nazir Fontenot and Daniel Perry are both grants management specialists at NEH. And I just want to pass the microphone to them to say a word of hello and a brief mention of how they work with the awards for faculty at HBCU's program at NEH. Jacob?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob Lusk. As Mary said, I'm a program analyst for the Awards for Faculty program. Some of my roles include applicant support, and I'll be one of your programmatic points of contact if you do receive the award. Today, during Mary's presentation, I'm going to be monitoring the chat feature in Teams. So if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to type those in. I may answer you directly in the chat, or I might save the question for later for our Q&A session so that we can answer it verbally for everyone's benefit. But thanks so much for being here, and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you so much. And Al Nazir?
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Al Nasir. I've been with the Office of Grants Management for the National Endowment for Humanities for about 3 years. Here with Daniel, we both work in OGM. We're here to answer any administrative questions that may come about in the chat. And yeah, we manage a large portfolio of awards for NEH, which include the awards for faculty. So if you have any other proposals that come along our desk, we're knowledgeable of those as well.
Thank you. And Daniel?
Hi, I'm Daniel Perry. I've been with the Office of Grant Management at NEH for a little over 2 years, and I do exactly what Naz does. So we'll be happy to answer any questions we can.
That's wonderful to have the 3 of you here. Thank you so much. And to all of those listening, you can reach out to any 4 of us about this program. We're happy to help, and if we don't know the answer, we'll put you in connection with a colleague who would. So Jacob and I tend to know the most about and answer questions about the program, the types of projects that you can pursue, to learn more about your project and to help you think about how to propose it. We, members of our staff and our division of research, will read draft proposals and that kind of thing. And Daniel and Al Nasir work on the side if you are various things such as eligibility, but also things after award is made that they would be able to answer questions about the terms and agreements for the award and that kind of thing. So please feel free to reach us at this email on the screen, facultyawards@nih.gov. And our contact information is also in the notice of funding opportunity if that's helpful. And we hope you will reach out to us. If nothing else from today, I hope that you will feel comfortable reaching out to us with your questions. We email, we phone, we're happy to talk with you. In fact, that's one of the best parts of our jobs, to learn about your projects and to help you prepare a proposal. So let's take a look at the agenda for today. First, I'll be talking about I'm going to talk about 40 minutes to go over the notice of funding opportunity that was recently posted and to cover the main areas that the notice of funding opportunity does. And then at the end, we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for your questions. So please, anything you have a question about, feel free to ask it in the chat. So first we'll talk about the goals of the program and the scope. Then we'll look at eligibility, who can apply for this. We'll look at more details about the program, so what kinds of projects can be supported. We'll look at the review criteria. How will your proposal be evaluated? And then we'll look at what materials do you need to prepare in advance of the April 12th deadline this year. And lastly, we'll take a look at application submission. All applications must be submitted through the grants.gov portal, and we'll just take a look at that at the very end. And then we'll have question and answer time. The notice of funding opportunity, I keep mentioning that. That's the guidelines, the full instructions for what to prepare and how to prepare it and how to submit. That and additional supportive information is available on this link on your slide. I think it should be hyperlinked. I hope you'll be able to look at that. If not right now, later on. It has everything I'll talk about today and that my colleagues will address is addressed through that link. So you can also look there for further information. So first off, let's just take a look at the goals of the program. The program seeks to strengthen HBCUs by encouraging and expanding humanities research opportunities for individual faculty and staff members. Awards support individuals pursuing scholarly research that is of value to humanities scholars, students, and/or general audiences. This program, we have designed it to be flexible in both project types and award periods to support faculty and staff at HBCUs. So you can apply to do humanities research in support of a wide range of outcomes, including a book project or an institutional goal or interest, or even an undergraduate course revision. And you can adapt the NEH work period to fit with your other institutional responsibilities that you might have. So you can apply to work between half-time and full-time on the NEH project or in some combination. And I'll say more about these aspects later in the presentation. So to take a look at the scope of the program supports humanities research in all areas of the humanities, regardless of geographic or chronological focus. And projects can be designed for various audiences, whether other scholars, undergraduate students, or the general public, or also a mixture of those audiences. Please also note that I mentioned it in the last screen, but this program supports individual researchers. So the individual applies to the NEH and the individual receives the funds. There's no cost sharing required for this grant. There's no indirect costs are allowed, and funds will go directly to the individual faculty or staff member. We can talk more about that if you have questions, but it is an individual grant. Awards support between 2 to 12 months, full-time equivalent, and you can opt, as I mentioned, to work part-time. Anything between half-time and full-time on your NEH project. The award amount is $5,000 per full-time month, up to $60,000. It is then the prorated if you are working less than 100% of your time on the NEH project. So let's take a look at who can apply for this program. And the answer to that is all full-time, part-time, adjuncts, retired faculty, or staff affiliated with an HBCU are eligible. And you can consult the White House Initiative on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity through historically Black colleges and universities for a definition and links to the institutions, the HBCUs. You can also find out more about eligibility in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, which is Section C. So in addition to being affiliated with an HBCU, the program is open to U.S. citizens and to foreign nationals who have been living in the U.S. for the 3 years preceding the deadline. You don't need to have an advanced degree. However, you cannot be a current student. So you can't currently be enrolled in some kind of degree program at the time of application. The caveat to that is that if you are pursuing a degree and you've finished absolutely everything, you've turned everything in, everything's been approved, a thesis, a dissertation, whatever, and all you're doing is waiting for the conferral, you can apply at that deadline, but you have to include a letter from the dean of the conferring school or your department chair attesting to your status as of that deadline. So just taking a little bit of a step back, because this program supports research in the humanities. And I wanted to just explain a little bit about how NEH defines the humanities. And our definition begins with the agency's founding legislation. The NEH, along with the NEA, were created by Congress in 1965. And the humanities fields on this slide come from the National Foundation on the Arts and Humanities Act of 1965. And it reads as follows. It mentions these humanities fields and some others. The term humanities includes, but is not limited to, the study of the following: language, both modern and classical, linguistics, literature, history, jurisprudence, philosophy, archaeology, comparative religion, ethics, the history, criticism, and theory of the arts, those aspects of social sciences which have humanistic content and employ humanistic methods. So you can see it's quite a capacious definition, and that is where NEH begins with its founding legislation. And I would just say, if you have any question at all about whether your project would fit within what NEH defines as the humanities, that's a wonderful question to be asking, and we're happy to talk with you about your project and to answer your questions. So now back to the program, more specifically, the Awards for Faculty at HBCUs program. As I mentioned previously, a key feature of the program is flexibility in project types and work plans. So let's look here at the types of projects that the program can support. You'll notice from the list that all projects must be based on humanities research. So research in literature, philosophy, history, and the disciplines discussed in the previous slide. However, humanities research can support a variety of project goals and outcomes. So like the NEH Fellowships program, which some of you may be familiar with, this program supports research in primary and secondary materials, leading to the development of books, peer-reviewed articles, digital materials, translations with annotations, and other scholarly resources. And projects can also support institutional or community goals or interests and draw on institutional or community archival collections, for example. Or thirdly, projects could improve an existing undergraduate course revision, including the development of humanities resources. For example, oral histories, identification of previously unavailable primary sources, or newly compiled historical or literary collections. Please note, though, that this program does not support development of new courses. The course must have been taught previously. And also, only undergraduate course revisions, not graduate, can be supported through this NEH program. We do have additional offerings and curriculum support, including a program for faculty and staff at HBCUs. So if that's more of your interest, reach out to us and we can be sure to help you find the right colleague at NEH. And then lastly, research in this program can lead to digital or web-based products intended to supplement a course revision or a publication project. So a faculty or staff member might collect oral histories in order to develop scholarly tools, such as language dictionaries or databases, or to contribute to an undergraduate course revision. Or a faculty or staff member might use the unique archives of a university for a project with an institutional goal or interest. And in recent competitions, we've had a wide variety of projects coming to the program, and several were funded. We see lots of types, including a revision of an undergraduate course leading to a peer-reviewed article on minority health and urban design in Baltimore since 1900. That project was from a scholar at Howard. And we've also seen in a recent competition, a scholar at Morgan State receive part-time support for research for an article on the young adult fiction of Nigerian-American author Nnedi Okorafor, and to facilitate the migration of a journal, Sankofa, from print to digital. So just to give you an idea that this program supports lots of different kinds of projects founded on humanities research. So typical activities that could be funded through this grant include humanities research. You could be traveling to archives, whether they're here or whether they're here, wherever here is for you, or whether you have to travel to do that. You could be collecting oral histories, you could be doing ethnography. You might be working from your home or your university office on editing, writing, and revision. And if you look on the right hand side of the screen, these are the typical print and digital products. What usually is the outcome from these awards? You could have an undergraduate course revision that would result, and you would teach the new course and perhaps have some materials that could then be utilized more broadly. You could end up doing an article, a monograph, translations, editions, and other interpretive tools. And projects centered on community or institutional goals might result in other types of print or digital materials. One example might be to research and write an exhibition catalog for an art or historical exhibit on campus. And in fact, the Awards for Faculty program recently funded a project like that. So here are some examples. These are all book projects, as you can see. So that is that first project type. And I can show you those visually in a quite straightforward way. So I have 3 here for you to look at. The first project was authored by Candace Bailey of North Carolina Central University. And it's a historical study of Southern women and music during and just after the Civil War. The recipient requested and received 12 months of support for writing and research in archives throughout the South. The second is a literary study authored by Sushmita Roy, a professor at Delaware State University. This book focuses on early Indian women's fiction written in English between 1890 and 1947, including a consideration of how these writers reassessed and challenged stereotypes about womanhood in India. And Professor Roy worked both part-time and full-time on the NEH project over a period of 12 months. The third is a book about the history and culture of Kakamatobe, a West African carnival, from 1899 to the present. The author, Courtney Mycotts, is a professor in art history and African studies at Florida State University, A&M. She requested 7 months of both part and full-time support for her work on this project. So it's, given the flexibility of the project types, I have not pictured here some of the other types that I did mention in the last screen, course revisions, institutional projects, that kind of thing. So deadlines and dates this year. First off, I want to tell you that the NEH staff will read and respond to draft narratives and work plans if you would like staff feedback. These are optional. There is no requirement to submit this, and it has no bearing on the review process, but applicants in the past have found this helpful to their process. If you would like to get staff feedback, you would need to submit a draft narrative and work plan, or whatever you have is fine, but to the best of your ability, we can give better advice the closer it is to the actual application format. So please do look at the notice of funding opportunity when you prepare it, and stick by the page limits and all those kinds of things. If you don't have a 3-page narrative yet, but you really want to get some feedback on a 1.5-page abstract or shorter version, by all means, I could be happy to look at that. The important thing, though, is to get it in by February 8th to the Faculty Awards at NEH.gov email box. If it comes in after that, we are not allowed to look at it at that point to respond. If you missed the draft deadline, we're always open for phone calls and emails about questions and so on. So don't worry if you missed that, but we hope to see some drafts from all of you. The next deadline to tell you about is the program deadline, April 12th, 2023. That's when your full application package is due to grants.gov this year. Again, we do not accept late submissions, so the deadline is really important to take note of. And you would learn from this round if you were funded or not funded by December, usually mid to mid-late December 2023. And you can begin your project as early as January 1st, so less than a year away. But if you wouldn't be ready to start, you don't need to start at January 1st. You can wait and start it all the way through September 1st of 2025. So that's a really big window of time at which you can begin your project. So now I just want to move into how will your materials be evaluated and who evaluates these? And the first thing I want to tell you about is the review criteria, which again, these appear in the notice of funding opportunity. These are in section E, and you should keep these prominently in mind when writing your proposal. All proposals that are eligible and complete and all those things that come into NEH are then evaluated and assessed by peer reviewers. These reviewers are external to NEH, and there are no standing committees at NEH. They're a new grouping every year. So so this is the criteria that they will use when they evaluate your proposal. And grant writing is its own form. So the first criterion pertains to the intellectual significance of the project for the humanities. So tell your reader what your project's about and why it is important. You should explain what it will contribute to your specific field in a way that humanities generalists can understand. So you might have, peer reviewers from multiple disciplines taking a look, and there's lots of people along the review chain who might be reading it. So keep that audience in mind. You should therefore also situate the project in the broader context of humanities research and knowledge. And then the second criterion concerns the quality of the conception, definition, organization, and description of your project, as well as the clarity of expression. And generally, peer reviewers find a well-written, clear application as a predictor of the quality of the planned publication. So writing a good abstract and narrative is important. So, in explaining how you go about the project. Number three, as I mentioned, we'll be taking a look at in a bit actually, is the detailed work plan. This pertains to what will you be doing during the NEH award period. I'll talk a little bit more about that in another slide, but it's very important to be clear to the peer reviewers how much time you are asking for support and whether you plan to work part-time or full-time or in some combination. And if you're working less than 100% time on the NEH project, you can address and should address for reviewers if you will have course releases or how you intend to do that, just so that it's clear for the reviewers. The fourth criterion asks reviewers to consider the applicant's preparation for the project. So if it's a new research area for you, or if you're moving into more of an interdisciplinary field, explain how you came to it and your skills for doing so. Also be sure to address your language competencies if you need language skills for your project, your knowledge of archives, if you're using specific archives, that kind of thing. And then the last criterion is the likelihood the project will be completed, as well as your dissemination and access plans. So I would mention the expected publication and other outcomes of the project. If you're proposing a book project, consider providing a description of the book, like chapters and so on. If you have a publisher or a series in mind, you can mention that. If you are thinking of doing an article, you can mention venues where you might be publishing that. And if you're proposing a course revision, you can indicate when you expect to teach the course and how you plan to disseminate the results of your research. And there's more about all of this in the notice of funding opportunity. So then let's take a look at what do you have to prepare in order to go through a review process and be reviewed, your proposal be reviewed, so that you can go through this review. So I've taken out of the notice of funding opportunity, it's a screenshot of the application components, all the materials you need to prepare by the April 12th, 2023 deadline. And this year it's been changed slightly to give you a little bit more information. It tells you at the top you've got some grants.gov forms, which those are filled out online. And then you have an attachments form to which you will attach the list of items such as the narrative, the work plan, and so on, as PDF documents. So that all of those things constitute an application. You do need to name your files as such, and even more important, to save them as PDFs. Grants.gov rejects .docs. So if you wait to apply and you only have 5 minutes to get that proposal in, I'd never recommend that. A .doc will be rejected by grants.gov, and you would need to save it as a PDF. So start early, and that way you can find out if there's any problems with your materials. The third column I really want to tell you about is whether the item is required, whether the item is recommended at the time of application, or whether it's conditionally required. Those are very important details to follow. If something is required, you must have it with your application package. And if you are missing a required element, your proposal would not go through the review process, and you'd have to wait another year to apply. So we want to make sure you're aware of that. And then the next column, it's the final one, page limits. Also very important to pay attention to the details. These are strictly enforced. So the narrative, for example, is 3 pages, and it says mandatory. And what is meant by that is if you attach something that's 3 pages and 2 lines, your proposal will be considered not eligible to go through the review. So please pay attention to those page limits as well, because we want to see your applications and we want you to be successful. So I was going to talk just briefly about 2 of the required attachments in particular. The others, they're all fully described in the notice of funding opportunity, but I just wanted to take a minute to look a little bit at the narrative. And the narrative should address 4 areas which are described in the notice of funding opportunity. And you'll notice significance and contribution, organization and methods, competencies, skills and access, and final product and dissemination, that these track quite closely to the review criteria. So your narrative should have these 4 sections and be addressing the questions that are asked or how you're advised in the notice of funding opportunity. As I mentioned, it's very important to make the case for significance. And sometimes it's helpful to identify the audience for your project to explain why it's significant to the humanities, and to put your thesis there. So all of these areas would constitute your narrative. And the notice of funding opportunity, section D, tells you everything about your application package as well as the details of what each attachment should include. The other resource I want to tell you about is we have actual funded applications available on the program resource page. That was the link I gave you at the first slide, and I'll show it again at the end. This year we put up 4 additional application samples. So the idea of those samples is not to show you exactly what you need to do or anything like that, but to give you an idea of the broad way that different recipients have written this document and been successful with it, to give you some ideas with that. The other thing to note with that is to make sure to follow the formatting instructions in the current notice of funding opportunity. Some proposals go back some time ago, so they were formatted in a different fashion. So you need to follow the current notice of funding opportunity. But I hope those will be helpful to you. The second required attachment I just wanted to pause a little bit on to tell you a little bit more about is the work plan. And again, this is another required attachment. It's attachment 2. And in this attachment, you should present a schedule for the period of performance. So the time that you will be funded by NEH. You should break down the tasks. I usually recommend, 2 to 3 months worth of time to break down the tasks and what you expect to accomplish in those smaller amounts of time. And the other thing to be very careful about is to state if it's full-time. So you're going to work 100% of your time on the NEH project. You're relieved from your teaching duties, your administrative duties, and so on. Or if you're working half-time or something in between half-time and 100%, to indicate that very clearly. Once we had someone working 7/8 of their time on the NEH project. So it's possible. We want to accommodate you and your needs and schedule. But you need to be very clear to the peer reviewers how much support you're asking for in terms of time and what you will accomplish in that work period. The other thing to mention is that the work period must be continuous. So you can shift between a part-time and a full-time work plan. So sometimes we see a faculty member teaching they're teaching, usually they're maybe have a 4/4 load. So they're teaching 2 courses in the spring and 2 courses they're released from. They spend that 50% of their time on the NEH project. And then during the summer months, maybe they're not teaching and they can work 100% of their time on the NEH project. And then in the fall, they go back to a part-time teaching schedule. So all of that's possible, but because it's so many possibilities in a way, you need to be very clear so that it can be evaluated. So just to sum up this whole discussion, so I showed the table from the Notice of Funding Opportunity a few slides back. This just shows you again, what are these required, recommended, and conditionally required attachments that you need to prepare. And we already talked about the narrative and work plan as required documents. You also need to submit a bibliography. That is a 1-page document, and to the best of your ability in 1 page to give the scope of your project. Very often scholars choose to put both primary and secondary sources on that. Your resume is a 2-page document. Again, it's shorter probably than a full CV. And we give you guidance in the Notice of Funding Opportunity on what you need to include in those 2 pages. The other required elements are grants.gov forms, which I mentioned before. So just you'll look out for those when you're on the grants.gov platform. There is a recommended document for the application package. It is called a confirmation of institutional support. And with this one, NEH actually recommends that you include this at the time of application, so April 12th. This should be a document on letterhead confirming institutional support signed by an institutional representative, such as staff in the Office of Sponsored Research, if you have such an office, or a vice president or a dean. And it should indicate that the institution will allow you to accept an award for faculty if offered it, even though it might reduce your teaching load. So while NEH encourages you, though, to submit this document at the time of application, if recommended for funding, you must submit it before NEH will issue an award. So in other words, if you cannot get the signatures and the support you need at your home campus by the April 12th deadline, that doesn't mean you cannot apply and go through a review if everything required is there and everything is complete and so on and so forth. But it does mean it gives you a window of time to get that if you don't have it. So, but at some point you would need that if you get to the point of being offered an award. And then the last element here is conditionally required attachments. And I would just urge you to look at the Notice of Funding Opportunity in Section D. What is conditionally required? You should not submit anything other than the required or possibly the recommended element unless you have a project type that fits with conditionally required. So applicants proposing additions or translations, database projects, proposals including visual materials, and proposals for undergraduate course revisions should submit additional materials. These appendices should not exceed the page numbers per item as described in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So just take a look there. And at the end, if you've looked through everything and you're still not, you want to be absolutely certain, by all means, you can call us or email us, and we can talk with you about it and clarify if you need any help. A couple other things just to be aware of. So the grants.gov required forms. There's a few things you'll be asked when you're getting ready to submit. One will be an abstract of your project as well as your project title. And so that you can compose this in advance and not be scurrying to do this right before you submit. It's an abstract that will appear on the title page, and the peer reviewers will be seeing that before they launch into your application materials. The other thing you'll need to have ready is the emails and contact information for 2 letters of reference. These will be solicited by NEH after the deadline. The referees will have until May 3rd to finish those letters. And what you will need to have handy is the email address, the name and title of the individual, if they are at a university, their university name and that kind of thing. And so just be aware of that. NEH will use the email you enter for that person to contact them. So you want to make sure the email is correct. Oh, and I do have that. No budgets required, and you shouldn't submit one that don't submit a budget. Okay, so a few pointers before I wrap up with this part of the session. NEH has a few policies which you should be aware of, and I did talk about these briefly already, but it's very important, and I don't want you to miss this information. So NEH will not consider applications submitted after the deadline. So be sure to start early and get it in advance if you can, because we aren't allowed to look at anything that will come in after, even if it's just 1 minute after the deadline. And it's time stamped, so just make sure to get that in plenty of time. Another thing to be aware is that NEH will not consider incomplete, non-responsive, or ineligible applications for funding. And those words mean different things to us at NEH, but what's important is if any of those things apply, then your application doesn't go through review. So for example, if you forgot to attach your 2-page resume, that's considered incomplete and your proposal wouldn't go through review, and it can't be added after the deadline date. If you have page limits, so if the narrative is 3 pages and you submit 6 pages, that is considered, I think that we'd call that non-responsive. Daniel and Al Nazir know the terms even better than me, but that would mean it wouldn't go through review either. So you really want to pay attention to those details. And then lastly, again, if you exceed page limits or deviate from formatting instructions, it won't go through review. So just make sure the notice of funding opportunity should be helpful to you as you prepare your application. So just taking a look now, you've had a time to see what do you need to prepare for this, how will things be reviewed, the criteria, those kinds of things. How do you go about submitting these materials? And as I mentioned, everything is submitted through the online portal, grants.gov. And in order to do that, you have to create a login.gov user account and then register and log into grants.gov. A link appears in the Notice of Funding Opportunity D3 to get you started with the login.gov process. And I have circled there in grants.gov, that's a screenshot that shows you, the buttons within grants.gov, register and to log in. Once you have done that in grants.gov, you then must create an individual profile in your account. And so the Notice of Funding Opportunity takes you step by step how to do that. If you have not set it as an individual account, this red apply button on the screen will not show as red, and you won't be able to click on it. And so that's why. That's probably what's going on. So just be aware of that. The reason is grants.gov mainly processes institutional applications, so applications from universities, applications from other entities, not individuals. This program's slightly unusual in the federal funding, in being an individual program. Then to access the application package, you should go through the program resource page on the NEH website. You will make sure to apply for the correct opportunity. 3 will show up. As I mentioned, this program, there are separate programs for Hispanic serving institutions as well as tribal colleges and universities. So you need to click on the correct opportunity for HBCUs. And then just to reiterate, submit your application early so that if there's any technical problems with grants.gov, you will get emails back telling you that. And you'll also get emails back from grants.gov, saying your application was submitted and that kind of thing. So make sure to allow plenty of time. It can get very congested up at the time of the deadline. So just be aware of that. And check that you've submitted correctly, check the application package, check that you get the emails. NEH will then look more closely at things like page numbers and things like that. So we will be in contact, but make sure to just be checking. And then there is a helpline at grants.gov, 1-800-518-4726. And please use that if you have questions about, the technical aspects of grants.gov or any settings there that are giving you trouble. They are the experts on that platform. So that I hope will be a helpful number to you. So this is my last slide before we go to a more free-form period. Just some resources that are available to you. The first is the program resource webpage, and that was the link on my first slide, and here it is again. And within that webpage, you will find that notice of funding opportunity that I keep talking about in this presentation. It's about 24 pages, but I would recommend that you start there and just take a look through that. We also have our sample application narratives I mentioned on that page. There's a link for recently funded projects through this program, and you can take a look to see what is the scope of other people's projects. And we also have a brief FAQ document. Another way, resources for you are submit a narrative and work plan for staff feedback. And I hope you will. That February 8th deadline 2023 is coming up. You would submit that to facultyawards@NEH.gov and follow the formatting in the notice of funding opportunity. By all means, call us, email us. We're happy to talk with you and to learn more about your project and your questions. And the last element there is if you have questions about the terms and conditions for the award, what it might mean, how, various details that Daniel and El Nazir are very able to answer your questions also right now. There's a link there for you. So here's our contact information and our names again. And with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Jacob to see if we have any questions. So feel free to type your questions in the chat and we will try to answer them. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. As Mary just said, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat. I'll either answer them there or bring them up verbally for us to discuss. I also have some general questions that we often get from year to year, so I'll post some of those as well. As Mary discussed in her presentation, these awards are made to individuals, and you'll have to create your own grants.gov account and apply as an individual person rather than through your institution for this program. But we often get questions about how the money is actually paid out. So Daniel or Al Nazir, do you want to explain how the award funds are actually given to recipients?
Sure. So the stipend is $5,000 a month, or prorated if you're doing between half-time and full-time. And you usually will get 3 months quarterly payments. It does go to you, not your university. Having said that, you can have the funds deposited into your personal account or into the university account. A lot of people do have them sent to the university because it helps keep fringe benefits and things like that. But the university has to pass them on to you. They can't take a cut. They can't, there's no indirect cost in this program. So whichever way you do it, all of the payments will come to you.
Thanks so much. And a follow-up question to that, how are recipients allowed to spend their funds? Do they need to include budgets in the proposal? Do they need to plan for any sort of financial reporting for the award?
As long as the costs, well, I'll take this one, but as long as the costs are reasonable, allowable, and allocable to the project, any costs should be fine. There is no budget that needs to be submitted, and there is no financial report that needs to be submitted for this program, but you will need to submit a final performance report.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Al Nazir. I'm just reading some questions that are coming in. We have a question about should submitting drafts, if you submit a draft, does it need to be in PDF format? It can, or it can be in Word format if you want to. You're going to submit those to our team through email at facultyawards@neh.gov by the deadline. So you can send them however you want, as long as they open. We'll be able to read them and give you feedback on them. But do remember that when you submit the real application through grants.gov, you will have to use, you'll have to save everything in PDF, or else the system will automatically reject your submission. We have another question that sort of relates to what counts as the humanities. The question is a little more specific, but to make it more broad to everyone, I'd remind you that Mary earlier in the presentation listed some of the disciplines that we consider the humanities as part of our founding legislation. Those include everything from literature, the history, theory of the arts, law and jurisprudence, archaeology, philosophy, and so on. But one thing to remember, if you're not entirely sure if your project sort of, whether it counts as the humanities or not, one thing you can always do is email us and discuss, tell us a little bit about your project so that we can give you some feedback and let you know if we think that the program is a good fit. But another thing that we remind applicants is that the first review criterion is significance of your project to humanistic scholarship. So it is sort of on the applicant to make that case, to argue for the value of their project to humanities research. Mary, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, that was such a perfect answer. It also doesn't have to be just a value to humanities researchers, because it might be a project you have the skills in humanities research and you're bringing the results of that research to whatever audience you're identifying. It could be to scholars, but it also could be your undergraduate students, or it could be the community. So, but absolutely, it needs to fit to that first criterion. You need to make a strong case for significance to the humanities. And the other thing to just remember from that initial slide that talked about our founding legislation, the other thing is, humanistic methods. So social sciences employing humanistic methods. We do fund projects, of course, in anthropology and in various other kinds of fields that go between areas. So but absolutely, that first criterion is really key, and we're happy to talk with you about it if you're still not sure.
We have a question that says, if we plan to travel to archives, how much information do we need to provide to sort of prove or be convincing on the grounds of feasibility? I would say that planning to travel to archives is, that's certainly something that people often do with these awards during their award periods. You can, certainly, I would encourage you to include your travel plans in your work plan document. And you can certainly list the archival collections you're planning to work with in your narrative or bibliography. In terms of feasibility, Mary, you may have more to say. I think oftentimes when reviewers give us feedback about feasibility, they're usually talking about, how ambitious the project is, how much is the person proposing to do in the award period. And we often see comments about, it seems like maybe they're proposing too much work or too little work. Mary, do you have more to say about that?
No, I think that's perfect, right? The reviewers, look at that third criterion for, does your plan match, the amount of time you're requesting from NEH match what you want to get done during that time? And so I do think listing specific archives is a good idea, even down to specific collections within those. Also indicating that you have, you've arranged for access or you've worked there before, the nature of the collection, those kinds of things, you can mention that as well. And that can all help just give reviewers enough details to understand what you plan to do.
Yes, and I'm continuously trying to think of more things to say while I'm reading new questions, and then I lose my thought. we have another question that goes right off of that says, does funding allow for travel and living expenses in the field? And yeah, I just want to confirm again, the award funds are yours to spend as you need. They're sort of intended as salary replacement while you step away from your teaching and administrative responsibilities. So you're not going to have to account for the way you spent the money to us. So yes, it can be used for travel and living expenses while you're doing your research. We have a really good question that comes up very often. I'll turn it over to Mary for this one. What types of people should we select to write letters for us, our letters of recommendation?
Oh, yeah, thank you. That's a great question as well. These are all good questions. So these are just advisory comments, and I would say in general, letters that know you and your project well tend to be stronger than letters that, if the person you're asking to write you a letter of reference has not kept up with your work or has not taken the time to review your proposal, those are less informed letters. So it's more important to get, I would say, to have someone write for you who knows your field, who knows your work within the field, and who knows what you've been doing since maybe, that there's not a big gap of time, that they knew what you're doing in your dissertation, but have lost track in 10 years and therefore can't write an informed letter. So even though some person might have a big name, if they haven't kept up with you, I would go with someone who has time to look at your proposal, to talk with you about your project, and takes time to write an informed letter. And the other thing is choosing at least one of your referees to be from an institution outside of your own, and possibly both letters of reference, but that's just, not a rule, it's just a suggestion. And the last thing I would just mention is, if you are working in an interdisciplinary field, or you're working in one field that's new to you, sometimes a strategy could be to have a person who can speak to your expertise in both fields or both disciplines, and that can be helpful.
Yes, and I'm not sure if we covered this in the presentation earlier, but just so that you'll know, your referees don't need to have written their letter by the application deadline. You'll submit your application package, and then after the deadline, a couple weeks after the deadline, actually, we will send requests for letters to the referees that you listed in the application. So referees have several weeks after the application deadline to submit their letters to us. We got another question that I wanted to share as to whether it was possible to apply to the general NEH fellowships program at the same time that you're applying to the Awards for Faculty program. The answer is no with this specific program. You cannot apply to the fellowships program and to this program in the same year. However, if you applied this year, you could choose whichever one to apply to next year as you wish. Some key differences between this program and the fellowships program is the rate of success is higher in this program than the fellowships program, and this program also provides some flexibilities that the fellowships program does not, including the types of projects that the extra types of projects that Mary talked about earlier, as well as the part-time option, which isn't available in fellowships. So those are some key things to know if you're weighing whether to apply to one program or the other. However, you can still apply or be a part of an application to other programs at NEH, including other divisions at NEH. There may need to be some scheduling that we work out if you were to get more than one award, but you can be involved in several applications, and Daniel might have a little bit more to add to that.
Well, I just want to add, you can be involved in several applications and even be involved in different projects, but you cannot, the time you spend on the projects cannot be more than 100% of your time. Also, you cannot get federal funding, and this is across all federal agencies, for the exact same activities and project. So you couldn't get a award from faculty for us and then another award from someone else doing the exact same project. They have to be different activities.
Yes. I was going to ask you to bring that up.
Oh, sorry.
And you were ready for it. Yeah. Yeah, we're close to the top of the hour, and I think we've answered all the questions that have come in. So the last thing I'll just post for my colleagues for you all is do you all have any tips that you would share with our audience about how to put together a strong application or how to be successful in applying to this program?
I'm happy to suggest some thoughts. I mean, one is to start early and to just be aware of the lengthy process. So if you put in an application in April, you won't be able to begin until January of next year. And so the review process is about 9 months for this program. So I would just start early to prepare your materials. Register right now for account on login.gov and grants.gov. So that's taken care of, because sometimes that takes some time to go through. So just go ahead and do it today, and then you have the option of applying, and it's all set and you don't have to think about it. But proofread your materials, send them to friends, to other colleagues, even to family members. Talk about your project so that you can test, are you communicating, to the audience. That can be helpful. Those are just some suggestions.
I would add, pay attention to the page limits, to the, if it's mandatory or required, you need to definitely have that thing in there. And just pay attention, read the notice of funding opportunity, and really adhere to what it says.
And call us if you have any questions. That's another thing. I hope you feel encouraged after this session today that you can call any one of us, and we want to help. So by all means, if you have a question later, or you're viewing this, after this webinar has been shown and you have questions, by all means, please reach out to us. We are happy to be and hope to be one of your resources. So I think with that, we are just about at the end of time. I do see someone typing, so if we can get to that question, we will. But if we didn't get to your question, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I was just going to say thank you to everybody for attending. Thank you to my colleagues, Jacob, Daniel, and Al Nasir, and to all of you for coming. If you have questions, please be in touch. We really hope to see your applications this year and to hear from you and answer your questions. Thanks again. Bye-bye.